Hello and welcome to a webinar hosted by the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the University of the Western Cape. My name is Lana Franks and I will be your host for this webinar entitled Techpreneurship. Is this a viable option for your future? Our hope is to inspire many more people including university students and especially more young women to consider a future career in tech and entrepreneurship. This webinar therefore also forms part of the CEI's celebration and recognition of women making waves in tech alongside men. To help us explore this topic today, focused on techpreneurship, which is an integration between technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship, we have four seasoned tech professionals on our panel: Dr. Maki Jantjies, Aldred Jordan, Lynette Hundermark, and Renier Kriel. They are representing academia, industry, and the tech incubation space. But before I introduce each panelist in more detail and launch our discussion, I want to encourage you as the audience joining us today to interact with us throughout the event and to take part in our discussion in the following two ways. Firstly, in the chat box, you're welcome to make comments. And secondly, in the question box, you can post your question to us. And you have the ability to vote for a question that has been posed by a fellow attendee. As much as we'd like to answer each question, we may not be able to do that. So your votes help us select the questions that are most popular. I think we are ready to begin. Our first panelist that I'd like to introduce to you, and thereafter they will make the introductory comments. Our first panelist is Dr. Maki Jantjies. Dr. Maki Jantjies is an associate professor and the head of information systems at the University of the Western Cape. Maki is part of South Africa's Inspiring 50 and is well known as one of the first and youngest Black female PhD graduates in computer science. Maki researches and develops mobile software solutions for education in STEM subjects for schools and is passionate about all things 4IR. She has further conducted studies on mobile systems design and adoption in health and small businesses. Maki, would you please share your opening remarks?
Thank you so much for the introduction, Lana, and greetings to all the wonderful panelists here and all the attendees, the virtual attendees. This is the new normal where our conferences are online and we get to interact in this way. Just like to highlight something that I'm the former head of Department of Information Systems. I stepped down from the role. My colleague has taken over that role. I think this is such an important discussion, especially looking at Women's Month and how we can get more young women within the field to come into tech entrepreneurship. I think my opening remark is anchored around my passion of starting this at early ages. We all know that the formative years of children's development is so important in exposing them to critical thinking skills, to innovation, and to certain opportunities that will later on set them on for life. So my opening statement is really around our ability to start fostering this innovation, to start fostering a love for technology at an early age, and looking at education in the whole ecosystem, right from ECDs, early learning centers, to primary schools, to high school, and then looking at higher education. And I think across the education ecosystem, we have an opportunity to start exposing young children to explore opportunities within the space. Thank you.
Thank you, Maki. Our next panelist is Aldred Jordan. Aldred Jordan is the founder and CEO of govchat.org, the official citizen engagement platform for the South African government. Aldred is a former ministerial special advisor and currently serves as digital communications advisor to various African governments. Aldred was also involved in the development of the Mixit app, if many of you can remember that app a few years ago, serving as an advisor and board member. Aldred, did you make your opening remarks?
Great. Lana, thank you so much for having me on this panel. I haven't seen you in many, many years, and it was great when you kind of reached out to kind of share the GovChat story. For those of you that don't know, GovChat started off a platform called Mixit. Still today, I believe, is the African continent's most successful messaging platform. Obviously been around for about, I think, between 10 and 12 years. And doing really, really well, allowing South African citizens to engage using data light systems. I was an advisor at Mixit and did quite a few successful mobile applications, trying to understand whether there was appetite for young South Africans to engage with the South African government, which did really, really well. I think we got about 1 million users in the first 3 months, and then I developed another platform on Mixit to do something similar for the president, and got, I think, 500,000 users in 48 hours. So massive, massive need for an engagement platform. But then Mixit closed down. Obviously, WhatsApp came in, and I needed to decide what I'm going to do, what my next move would be, and then decided to take my learning there and create a very simplistic platform called GovChat, which allows citizens to connect with their public representatives. It's been a 4-year journey since I left Mixit. Took my own personal resources and created this platform. But like you will hear this afternoon, many of us, struggle. It's a very, very lonely journey. And mine is not a unique one, but struggled a lot and ran out of funds. And I lost everything. I needed to move back into my mom's place. My daughter got suspended from school. It was the toughest journey ever. And out of nowhere, someone that was watching the work that I was doing on LinkedIn was really excited with what I was doing, and told me that he'd like to help. I said, look, I'm done. After 4 years of giving my everything into this platform, I'm finished. I don't want to hear about GovChat anymore. And he said, well, here's $1 million. See if there's a way, if you can take this concept into something tangible. It kind of just shows that there are still many good people around. I mean, I didn't know this person from above, so he was just watching the work that I was doing over many, many months, and gave me $1 million, 12 million Rand at that time. About 11 months later, GovChat gets another investment from a JSE listed entity called Capital Appreciation of 20 million Rand, so 30 million Rand in about 12 months, where we today are able to provide this technology at no cost to the South African government and to citizens. Today, we have about 5.5 million active users on that platform, and it's moving from a engagement platform to a platform that is digitizing government processes, which is a massive need. Most of you will recall the SASSA Social Relief of Distress grant. And as you know, SASSA has about 17 million grant recipients. We have digitized the application process, allowing citizens not needing to go to a SASSA office or to apply, standing in a long queue. You can now do this on your mobile phone, and we have processed well over 4 million applications in 3 days on the GovChat platform. This is a world's first. And again, I'm really excited, from where it started to massive struggle to where it is now, massive opportunities out there. And I hope that I can share a lot more on this panel when there are questions later, Lana. Thank you very, very, very much.
Thanks, Aldred. Looking forward to unpacking your journey and the lessons, the hard lessons learned along.
Yeah.
Sure. Next up, I'd like to introduce you to Renier Kriel. Renier is the CEO at the French South African Tech Lab. So he is in the digital incubation space. And this is an early stage incubator that helps founders from concept to market. Renier is a seasoned techpreneur starting straight out of university. Very brave, Renier, and has a passion to help founders develop into great and impactful leaders. Renier, could you make your opening remarks?
Thank you, Lana. Thank you for everyone for being here. So like Lana said, I started a business straight out of university, ran that business for 10 years, employing up to about 50 people at one point, learned a lot of lessons through that process. But one thing that I did pick up in that journey is that the culture of entrepreneurship in South Africa is very underdeveloped. So not a lot of appetite for people to start businesses. And one of the core reasons why I believe is a lack of support, a lack of guidance, a lack of contextualizing what failure means when it comes to being an entrepreneur. So a lot of us have references of parents or family members that work in a corporate, and failure there typically resulted in getting fired or losing a job. Whereas in entrepreneurship, it actually failure is learning, and it's good for you, and it helps you actually grow and become a better entrepreneur. So I'm passionate about helping entrepreneurs through the personal difficult struggles of building a business and using their own strengths to develop that business, not necessarily copying something that works or something that someone else does, but really building up the confidence to do it in your own flavor and your own style, and building something that's meaningful and has a large impact on South Africa and the African continent.
Thank you, Renier. We need those supportive spaces, absolutely. Our last panelist I'd like to introduce is Lynette Hundermark. Lynette is the co-founder and CEO of Useful and Beautiful, a mobile solutions consultancy that focuses on enhancing customer or user experience through the power of mobile and digital technology. Lynette, alongside with Marky, is also one of those recognized women in tech. She's one of the top 30 most influential women in digital marketing in South Africa, and won the top female in tech role model award for South Africa and Southern Africa in 2019. Lynette, could you make your opening remarks?
Hi, Lana. Yes, so I have my own company, which I absolutely love. I started that 6 years ago, and I never planned on being a tech entrepreneur or an entrepreneur or anything. It's something that just sort of happened because of life circumstances. The company I worked for previously, they closed down, and because of my work in the industry, it was something that just, it was encouraged by all of my clients, actually. And I thought, well, let's give it a go and let's see what happens. And here I am 6 years later, and I'm absolutely loving it. I love the work that I do because it's really about creating meaningful solutions that are applicable for our country. And that's what I love most. I've been in the mobile space since the launch of the first iPhone back in 2007, 2008. I was working in the UK at the time. So I've grown up with the whole mobile evolving technology. And it's really lovely now that, sustainable solutions are key. Another thing that I do is I'm also a part-time lecturer at UWC in the Future Innovations Lab, which is an amazing program to be a part of. It's in conjunction with UWC, Samsung, and the DTI. And the aim of this program is to provide digital skills to bridge that digital gap for the previously disadvantaged youth. And just before this, actually, I attended our first graduation with our last batch of students. There were 74 of them that graduated, and it was just so amazing to watch the journey from, you know, where they started without any digital skills at all to where they are now. I mean, they are properly employable. You know, before this, I never thought of my career as changing lives. You know, you're creating these cool tech solutions. You don't see it as life-changing, but now going on through this program and teaching people, you know, really what digital is all about and how you can actually apply it in the social innovation space. You know, these guys created such amazing solutions, from postpartum depression, tackling youth unemployment, tackling safety and security, subsistence farming. I mean, it's so amazing that to know you can use your skills that you've learned throughout industry to help actually guide young people to creating something that's going to make a difference in our country. I mean, it's super fulfilling. I'm very, very passionate, not only about growing the community as well. I'm, as you mentioned, with Maki, you know, we've been recognized, and it's such an honor to get these achievements. And, you know, it's always been a surprise for me as well, because I just do what I do, and then you see, okay, you've nominated for this and you've won this, and it's lovely. But, you know, that's all well and good. I really want that to be an impact in not just attracting females into the tech industry, but more so retaining them. Because that's what I found is the issue the older I get, is that there's not enough women, especially staying in the field, especially with, you know, circumstances, getting a family and whatever. And I like to lead by example, because, you know, I do have both worlds. It is hard, and I think there's many more women like me that can show, okay, this is actually achievable. The higher you get, then, you know, then the more female role models there are, I think that's actually going to help create a sustainable career path for young women in particular.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those opening remarks, Lynette. There's so much to unpack in the conversation. And just a word to the audience, join me in drawing out some of these gems. We have a real wealth of experience on our panel today. So please pose those questions. We'd love to get to them as well, and integrate that into our discussion. But to kick off this our discussion today, I'd like to have us look at a bit of a landscape view and what's changed in the tech sector over the last few years. And I was wondering if Maki could talk to that a little bit. How has the technology space transformed over the past few years? What have you noticed? And if you could share with us.
I think the technology space and technology entrepreneurship have evolved over the years. My first interaction with technology, I was in standard 6. I don't know what it's 6th grade what's today. But I was roughly 13, and that's when I started learning how to program with Pascal back in the years. And at that time, there were very little South African role models in the tech space. And so upon completion of high school and going into university, there was a limitation on what were your options at that time. And entrepreneurship in tech wasn't promoted as one of the big things that you can actually go in. And so upon completing university, when I look at my university experience, and when I look at all the opportunities that have now come up in the form of incubators, in the form of hackathons, there were no hackathons when I was a student. So all that exposure about using your technical skills to solve everyday world problems has tremendously grown. And I think there are very many initiatives that are now trickling down also into basic education and not only in higher education. So we're seeing a large investment over the years in South Africa on ensuring that we grow the number of tech entrepreneurs, and also the fact that we expose young children to digital skills. I think many South African children can relate to the fact that the exposure to any form of computer literacy or digital literacy many years back was actually near impossible. And it was very few schools which were designated as technical schools. I was very lucky to actually go to a technical schools. And so it was second nature for me to be involved in technology. But getting to university, I realized that it wasn't second nature for the majority of young South Africans. So you can see a large, I think we still have a bit of a way to go, but we need to acknowledge the fact that from those years moving into where we see ourselves now, both higher education and basic education have tremendously improved in the sort of support structures that we put in place. And I think, speaking also as academics, we have also started now incorporating entrepreneurship into what was traditional academia, where entrepreneurship could not be seen as something that I'd be teaching within a classroom context. So over the years, we have seen a tremendous amount of shift and change within the sector.
Yeah. And Maki, just to stay there, where do you think some of the gaps are within in the way we're preparing for a technology-enabled age, particularly in schooling? As much as it's changed, where do you say the glaring gaps are?
The reality is that the South African education system is a two-tier system. The system was initially not made to cope with the number of children who have now come into the education system. So as South Africa, we have taken a decision that all children have to go to get a primary education. And therefore, there is a need for infrastructure in schools, but schools which now have the capability can give children the technical skills that they require. And I must commend the Department of Basic Education, because when you look, if I have to look at 10 years back, the number of schools that have grown, which now have computer labs or which have tablets in them that can form or enable some form of digital skills learning and STEM skills learning, has tremendously improved. This also owing to public-private partnerships. So there've been a lot of partnerships between government and the private sector that have enabled schools to start getting resources that can start exposing and training children into digital skills. But it hasn't been enough. There is a huge backlog. Schools are still suffering with some of the bare necessities. So in some cases, when private sector wants to go and partner, they then realize that, but hang on, we still need to get some of the bare necessities ready within these schools to enable that to happen. So you find that over the years, there has been a steady growth of children going into STEM-related skills development programs when they go into higher education. And this largely being spurred by the investment that we're putting into basic education on increasing technical skills development. A sector that I feel that we still can do more is this early stage development, so pre-primary school, the young children who are in what we'd call crèche in the South African context of pre-primary school. There in ECD, we still have an opportunity to better cultivate the opportunities that children learn. So right now in South Africa, doing robotics is still kind of a bit elite. Your average South African child will not have the opportunity of doing robotics at a very young age, or doing those technical, having a technical environment that can expose them to that aspect. So I think in terms of infrastructure, skills developments of teachers still have to be upskilled. You have a lot of teachers coming through the system who are now getting that exposure, but teachers within the system already did not have an opportunity to be exposed to that. And so you have many children leaving high school who may never even go into university, never having the opportunity of being skilled or exposed to any form of technology or technical skill aspect.
Thanks so much, Maki. So there's this idea that everybody should learn to code. And I was wondering, Aldred, from a techpreneur's perspective, having founded a tech company, Aldred, did you say that everyone should learn to code? Every tech founder should be a programmer, an app developer. What are your thoughts on that sort of notion that everyone should learn to code? So
definitely, I think that it would make everyone's life a lot easier if the founder could code, because you kind of understand what this tech is for, what the purpose is for, and but I'm gonna be honest and say no. I think that if I look at your theme, I would say that it needs to be someone that is a lot more well-rounded. Nero will tell you that it's not always about the product or the platform that you're trying to build, from an investment point of view, investors look at people. They don't necessarily look at the technology. Anyone can build technology, right? There's so much open source stuff out there. There's so much things that you can create from a code point of view. But from a entrepreneurship point of view, I think that you need to be well-rounded in understanding the technology, understand how this is going to be built, but the business around it is possibly the most important thing, because you're starting it as a one-man show, and so you possibly the coder, you're possibly the person that's got to sell this thing, that's got to market this thing, that's got to make sure that you have a client base. And so I guess it's more important to be a lot more well-rounded than to focus on the actual code. My success story comes without me being a technologist, where I needed to actually code like someone like Mark Zuckerberg or many of these other successful entrepreneurs or companies out there. I focused a lot of my success around understanding what the need is, understanding what my purpose is, but also understanding what it's going to take to make this happen. Being in the public sector is very, very difficult because there are issues around leadership, there's issues around politics, and then obviously there's a traditional way in doing things. I've been advocating for digitized processes within government for many, many years. And thank goodness COVID hit, because it's through COVID that we were able to realize a lot of the stuff that I was talking about for many, many years. And so I guess it's been a massive, massive blessing, because we were able to do a lot of things that would normally not have taken place. And we kind of prepared for about 18 months for this moment. So if SASSA was going to ask me to digitize the application process for SRD grants, and we weren't ready with it 18 months ago, I would not have been able to fulfill that. So a lot of the times I think that we must also be ready for a specific moment. You know, a lot of these things are timing driven. I know I'm going off the topic a bit, but I think it is important that when we are developing code, that we make it relevant to specific situations, because a lot of these things are timing relevant. So I hope that answers that question, Ilana.
Yeah, I think there's an interest. I think many people are asking, what is the typical learning journey for a techpreneur? You know, if we think of how schools are beginning to expose more kids to coding and more kids to sort of tech education, sure. Many of those who have missed that sort of exposure is wondering, oh my gosh, do I need to learn to code now to be a techpreneur? You know. Agreed. And so I think what you're saying is sort of, it's probably to your advantage to know, but it's not a necessity, because Agreed. There's more to techpreneurship than just technology. There's also understanding business.
Yeah.
And so I'm quite interested to know, if you were to describe the learning journey for a techpreneur, is there a typical journey? Yeah.
So there's one thing that I can guarantee any entrepreneur will go through, and that is failure. And through that failure, we will learn. You will definitely learn. If you look at many VC companies in developing countries, like in the US, you would need to show them that you have started a business at least 3 times, and that you've showed that you took those failures and those learnings and you've implemented it in the new stuff that you want to build. They're not going to allow you to waste their money on learning. And so you're going to have to figure a lot out of that learning through a failure. So if there is one thing that I don't care who you are. I don't care how wealthy you are. I don't care if you have a trust fund somewhere, you will fail and you will learn through that failure. And I promise you, you'll be pretty hot in time. But failure is definitely going to happen. That is the one thing that I can say. That's part of the journey, I guess.
Yes, and I think and agreed. I think Maki also alluded to that as well. And I was wondering as well from the other techpreneurs here, how do you relate with this idea of this learning journey and the fact that failure is likely to be part of it? How have you experienced that? Lynette, I'm going to point to you.
Look, honestly, there is no textbook, I would say, that will say, read from the preface right until, the last chapter, and there you go. You are there to become a tech entrepreneur. It's, you've got two challenges. Number one, the technology challenge, because, I've grown up with the technology also like Maki from school. I was introduced to a computer when I also was at standard 6 when I went to high school. And I was also in that day, you had, and I'm from Pietermaritzburg, I think there was 2 Indian schools. I was saying Indian schools because I come from that era that had computers, and we could use it, and also we could take it to matric. But nowhere were you taught, okay, you are using this to become a business person. That wasn't. I mean, when you did tech, you either were a server guy, and I'm saying guy because you always saw it portrayed as guys, or you were an admin person, a data capturer or something. That was it. It wasn't anything else. And obviously, when I started my career, I went more into the programming side because I had an aptitude. I love maths, and it was just a natural progression for me. So yeah, nowhere between that did I think, okay, I was going to become a tech entrepreneur at all. Like I said, the company I worked for closed and all of that. And I think so many women, and Maki will agree with me on this, is that we didn't follow a learning path. It's something that just kind of happened. And it happened because of the experiences. And I think to be a tech entrepreneur, it's important to have those experiences. And while, yes, you might not need to be a coder, I think learning the fundamentals of coding is going to help you understand what is and isn't possible. Because, I think the big thing is everybody thinks of tech as a golden bullet, and it is not. It is an enabler. And that's what we are teaching our students. And that's why I love this program so much. And I'm going to go back to it because we are teaching entrepreneurship, and I'm going to say it the right way. Because a lot of people think you build a product, you go and market it, and you're going to win, the awards, and you're going to get the users and all of that. That's not how it works in the real world, especially now. Back when I was, involved in the first iPhone apps and all of that, yes, it was making a splash and being the first. But now people really want, how is this purposeful to me? What difference is this making to my life? And you need to think contextual. So be it a social challenge, be it, something like a banking app or whatever, how are you making this relevant to me, the consumer? And especially today in COVID as well. I think everybody has been forced to get on this tech bandwagon. They've been forced to use mobile applications. It's no more nice to have. So yeah, you really need to have this holistic view of the challenges of how you're going to make life better for somebody. And yeah, of course, you're going to fail. And this is the way you learn. I mean, when you start off, and this is where I think your experience and your educational background helps you, because when you start off a solution, you start off with the best informed decisions. That's your basis. And then from there, you need to have the ability to learn as you go along and to adapt. And you need to have the sense of humility, because I think this is the big issue as well, is that there's a lot of arrogance in the tech space. People think they've created the solution and people are going to use it because we're the best. If you look at the App Store ecosystem and the number of apps, there's millions. You are competing, and you really need to be relevant. You need to adapt to the consumer base, because this is the thing as well I find in tech, digital, mobile especially, is your consumer is not consistent in their behavior. They are challenging, they are difficult. And you need to be agile enough to adapt. And also you need to be a really good team player with really good personal skills to get people to help you, because it's impossible for you to do everything. But you need to be a good director. So you need to have that leadership, and in terms of accountability as well, because I think this is also something that lacks in the entrepreneurship in general, is that people don't like to take accountability for something. You know, if something fails or if you got something incorrect, you know, we're human. And I think if you admit that, you know what, I made a mistake, but I'm trying, I'm going to listen and try. So yeah, I'd say there's a lot of learning paths, and I don't think of it as a learning path. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Maki, but I see it in my life, and this is what I teach my students. It's a puzzle. I think there's so many different puzzle pieces, and it just fits into the whole ecosystem. I don't see it as something that's linear. You can't see it as linear.
Right, and that's something I've often heard. It's not linear, and it's I think it's so immensely challenging, because a lot of our learning in school and higher education is this sense of a linear journey, and so it's how do we work with this uncertainty, you know?
Yeah, I think
And
that's because of school. Traditionally, you know, that's school. You learn in a specific path, and you know, at the end you get awarded this big prize. And I think this is what virtual and COVID has taught us as well, that it's not a linear path. You know, there's so many unknowns, unforeseens, and you kind of need to adapt and integrate and make it work. And
right,
it's
so
not always a linear path.
yeah, so you're beginning to speak about these attributes, and I'm going to switch to Rainier for a moment. And Rainier, you've had experience as well working with many sort of startups. I think your bio, you had worked with 14 startups last year, and you're about to take 10 to 15 through for in this new year as well. So when it comes to this, how do you prepare? How do you prepare your techpreneurs? How do you prepare them if this journey isn't very linear? How do you go about preparing within this incubation space?
Sure. I think one of the first things to just realize when you are a founder and starting out is that solving problems as a founder is a lot different to what we get taught at school, and Lynette alluded to that. Specifically in the sense that when we solve problems in school or do projects, we kind of have an idea of what the end result needs to look like, and then we break it down into steps leading up to that point. And we have these proximity objectives of moving along the way to get to the final objective, and we have kind of a picture of what that is. The problem in startup world is that if you're building a business, you are likely building something that's either you're the first in industry or you're one of the first few, and there's not a lot of information on the specific problem you're solving. So the first challenge you have is actually figuring out, but how could this end objective look like? I mean, if you can't have the end objective of what this product is going to look like defined now, because there's not enough information available, how do you even plot proximity objectives from there back to where you are today to understand, like, if I wake up tomorrow as a founder, what should I be spending my time on? Now, what we do is we try and help founders to see that there's no guaranteed recipe for success, but there are things that could help you not fail as often as you would have if you wouldn't do those things. One of those things is, as an early stage founder, we believe there are only two core things that you should be doing. You should either be speaking to customers or potential customers, users, or you should be building your product. Now, a lot of founders end up spending time on PR and doing a lot of branding and a lot of doing other things, when the early, which are things that become really important as you go along the journey. But in the early stages, speaking to users and building your product does two things. One, it actually contextualizes how solving this problem could look like, which is those proximity objectives I spoke about. But then going back and building your product actually gives them something in their hands that they can test with and play with and give you feedback on, that actually helps you determine what the next proximity objective is. And slowly you start building this loop that iteratively helps you uncover and explore this problem. So if you take that back to the academic environment, it's much more like being in a lab and discovering, brand new things that no one has played with. It's not a linear academic project. It's more like a playful, let's try things, see what happens, get feedback back, and use that feedback to adjust our course and do new things. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is just the personal headspace, like getting founders to a place that they are comfortable with the daily challenges and yet not lose hope of the future vision they're trying to build. And if you want to read up on a concept, it's called the Stockdale paradox. And there was a guy, I think his name was James Stockdale, and he was part of the US military, and he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And he was one of the only survivors out of that. And long story short, go read up about a great story. But he said it's very important that one you have your hope on the future of what could happen, but you confront the daily realities of how tough it is. Now, often I see startup founders actually be so excited about their future that if things go challenging and they fail daily, they lose hope in their future. But if you can keep that hope and your daily struggles separate, it's much easier to go, you know what, daily is going to be challenging, but I just need to keep going every day, every day, every day. And all those failures just mount up. But eventually, if you keep the hope alive, if you keep the dream alive, slowly you start moving in a direction. And I think Eldred will attest from his journey, it's just actually embracing those challenging things daily without losing the longer term hope. So we work with the founders to get their vision on the bigger picture of what they can build, how big it is, what the impact could be, but then helping them actually move through the daily challenges and the struggles of what it takes to build a startup.
Right, sure. So there's a lot in there. There's this idea of embracing experimentation, getting out of the building, and so I'm wondering, there's this concept called SISP, a solution in search of a problem. So where many people start with an idea without having gone to speak to a single person, and so yeah, so I'm wondering, what makes a great idea with this, as Lynette said, there are so many apps out there, and yet I know in my experience with working with students, I still get students coming up with an app idea. What makes a great idea?
So just on the solution, looking for a problem, that's a very tough spot for an entrepreneur to be in, because in order to get away from that, you actually have to admit that perhaps the product that you built is not the one that's going to solve the problem. And that's a really tough place. So I would never recommend building a product and then looking for a customer, but do it the other way around. It's a really tough space. But in terms of good ideas, what we look for, there are 4 or 5 things which I think is key. And as a general guideline, if you're evaluating the quality of your idea, where you're going, one of these things could really be helpful, I believe. So firstly, it's a growing industry. So a growing industry is an industry that is growing double digits in the next now or in the next few years. So I'll give an example. In season 6, which we just concluded at our incubator, we have a startup working in the waste management space. And the waste management market in Africa is currently very small. It's very underdeveloped compared to the rest of the world. But this is an industry that's going to grow double digits globally. And you can just imagine Africa catching up on that lag with all our future consumers. This is a massive industry in the future. So this startup building a solution that's going to become a massively growing industry. If they just grow the same size as the industry, they'll be growing really fast. But because they're one of the only players and the early players in that space, chances are they're going to have a significant advantage. The second thing is subject matter experts. So if you have a founder that really understands the industry, has been working a long time in it, that really gets the ins and outs of that industry, and I'm not talking about just experience, I'm talking about the underlying dynamics of what value is within a sector, that's really a good sign. IP, that's the obvious one. Like if you have a protectable IP, that means no one can get in there. If you have a very easy way of getting new customers, like if your cost of acquisition of getting new users is extremely cheap, which is very rare, then that's normally a good sign. And the last one, which I think there's a lot of opportunity in South Africa with, is if it's something that's government regulated. So if you think about protection of information acts and those kind of things, so companies have to comply, and I think government in the future will get more strict on these regulations. If you're building tech or a solution which will really help people simplify that process of complying to regulations, your cost of acquisition of getting a new customer is going to be significantly lower, because people will be forced to use that kind of tech. Now, if you as a startup have one of those 5, that's a good sign. Great companies like Airbnb and those ones typically have 2 or 3 or maybe even 5. And so the more you have of that, the better it makes it up. But generally, a startup can thrive from just having advantage in one of those. The last one I forgot to mention is a solution that's at least 10 times better than a current solution. Like if there's something exists and you can build a product that's literally 10 times better, which is an extremely hard thing to do, then there's reason to believe that startup is set up for success.
Great, thanks so much for that. There's a lot in there. So it sounds like even though there isn't a specific learning journey tailored out, there are some core things that startups can pay attention to in the development of an idea. And I'm going to quickly for a moment turn to our Q&A. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A that I'm quickly going to pick from. Let's turn to the focus on women in tech for a moment. Maki, I think this is a great one for you as well. There's a question from Zainunisa Ali, and she asks, what initiatives are there for women in tech in higher education institutions? Is Maki with us?
Yes, she is. I think the higher education opportunities are on a skills development perspective, on a research perspective, and also on an entrepreneurship perspective. Having great insights, and I think your panelists have alluded to this, having great insights into the tech sector gives you 1 foot ahead of knowing how you can apply the skills. And I think Lynette put it quite well. We should always see technology as an enabler. In entrepreneurship, an app is not a business. And so when you see the skills and knowing the insight, then how do you go into the market and you're able to solve people's problems and commercialize this? So skills development gives you a good opportunity to be able to get in there. There's also research opportunities whereby you can innovate through research, something that ultimately it can be a solution that you can also commercialize later on. So those 2 entry points are good opportunities within higher education that gives you opportunities into the world. And that's what we tend to focus in higher education.
How is university preparing students across faculties for a technology-enabled age? Yeah.
So universities have for many years been largely traditional, and we in universities and higher institutions as a whole have also been waking up to the COVID-19 impact of looking at how we do things and moving from a less siloed approach mentality. So in previous years, if you have to register for a business-related course, you would just be focusing on business. If you focus on a humanities-related degree, you'll only be focusing on a humanity-related degree. But I think more and more higher learning institutions are evolving to have multidisciplinary approaches to skills development. And so we've started new academic programs which cuts across faculties. For example, somebody with no programming background can come from the arts background to come into an augmented reality and virtual reality type of a program that can skill them for that. So higher learning institutions are also vastly adapting to a new multidisciplinary approach that can skill children towards that. Higher institutions also have different communities of women who program, women in tech entrepreneurships, that expose young students, female students, to the opportunities that they have within the field. So it's always good. I always encourage students that if you have any entrepreneurship perspectives or would want to see yourself as an entrepreneur, it's great to find that sort of a community in a high learning institution and spend time with them, because they largely invest in exposing young females in opportunities that are out there for them.
Thanks, Maki. Lynette, would you like to add something to the conversation in terms of women in tech, and what opportunities do you see for women in tech in South Africa today?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, the opportunities today, I mean, admittedly, there's not a lot, but there is far more than there was when I started off, which is great. So there's, yeah, obviously the university route, but as Mikey said, you know, it's still very much traditional, but fortunately with other programs that are introduced to the university, and with the way tech is, you know, it cannot be a linear siloed sort of route. There are more integrated approaches, which I'm so glad to hear from a multidisciplinary side. I mean, I was one of those who created my own, actually, because I majored in, I did a double honors in computer science and psychology, which wasn't even heard of in those days, to kind of merge the two. So I'm glad that this is now an opportunity for lots of people, but definitely there's a lot more independent programs, which I think are great. So like in Cape Town alone, there's, you know, Code for Cape Town that predominantly has females. There's a lot, I mean, there's so many. There's also, I think with the access to the internet and resources that are available, that makes it also a lot easier for people to self-study these days. Whereas before, you didn't have that opportunity. So if you're interested in a particular topic, it's quite easy, you know, to go into Google or Apple or wherever, and you can teach yourself. And I think that's what's really cool, especially for women, because, you know, we don't have the luxury, I think, and the older you get as well, if you do have family commitments and you've got children and all of that, you don't have the luxury of enrolling yourself on a course or going and doing a program, because you've got so many other things that you still, you know, you're responsible for. But at least with online learning, you can be part of a community and take part in, you know, these hackathons and all these things. So I think that's really great. And also, you know, platforms like LinkedIn and all of that, you know, this is the thing, is that there's a lot of tools and there's a lot of access to resources now. And I think that just needs to be made more visible, I think, to people, to realize that you've got access to this. You know, quite a few of it is even free. And it's just a matter of, you know, having that commitment and dedication to set aside like an hour or two to just, you know, self-enrich yourself. And it is hard, you know, I think as a female, because there's so many, you know, our plate is always full, let's be honest. It's always full with something, especially when you've got kids. I mean, I've got a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, and even though they are older, but they still need reassurance from mum for something. And it's just, you know, it's just kind of in us, I think, from a, you know, historic genetic background. And yeah, it's just because I think tech as well, I think there's also this idea which I think needs to be stopped as well, that you can only really get into it if you're a female, like when you're much younger, not when you're older. Whereas when you're a guy, yeah, you can get into it whenever you feel like you're seen as a hero. And I think there needs to be strong messaging for women as well, that no, you can get into it whenever you want, really. It's just a matter of trying something new. And what I found actually, and especially again now with the course that I've been doing, because, you know, we've got people from age 18 to 35, what I found was and what I love about it is that there was a 50-50 ratio with males and females. But what you find as well is that women who are older that get into the field, they come in with a very different idea from a community or society point of view. And it's very contextual. And what they just need is that mentorship to say, okay, you've got a brilliant idea. Let's direct it into a technical solution. And they don't realize, okay, we can actually have a career in tech here. So I think, yeah, mentorship is probably something that women should actually look towards, mentorship in tech, rather than even the digital tech skills, because I think that will also help direct them into which sort of technical field they're going to go into.
Yes, thanks Lynette. Yeah, Aldred, I'm actually wondering, you've got quite a sort of a continental lens, and you've also had interactions in the US. I'm wondering, what, in terms of the representation of women in tech in those spaces, what have you seen is there an underrepresentation as is commonly said, or would you argue that there isn't?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's for, us as founders to kind of change that. In fact, my head developer is a female, and half of my staff are females. Half of our coders are females. And we are really, really proud of it. And just the way that they are thinking is totally different. Many of us would have thought, to go and build GovChat as a mobile application, but they've made it clear to us to say, don't build an app. If you look at apps out there, they're not very successful. You look at big corporates like banks, look at big corporates like telcos. If you compare their subscriber bases to the app downloads, the two don't make sense. And so our developers, who are females, are telling us build where there is access. And we've built technology through applications like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, where you already have it on your mobile phone. So again, just a different type of thinking. They just understand it a lot better. No issues with the men out there, but females are really, really bringing it. The women are bringing it. There's phenomenal success stories. The success of GovChat, I can tell you now, is because of many, many females. I've surrounded myself with females. My CFO is a female, not just tech. They just come with a whole different mindset. Like operationally, they are solid. It's beautiful.
Brilliant.
And I can only say thank you. They keep me grounded.
Awesome. Women, did you hear that? We're bringing it. I like that. Awesome. Great contribution. Renier, I'm wondering from your perspective, have you seen a noteworthy difference in tech companies that have been founded by women compared to those founded by men?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our last season at our incubator, we had 9 startups, of which 3 of them had female founders. And just the way female founders go about it, and I think this is a very distinct advantage that female founders should actually capitalize on. Now, in the case with male founders, there's there's often an ego thing that comes in play, and there's like I'm smarter, I'm better, I'm faster, I'm greater, I'm stronger, and that's just a male thing. It happens all the time. And when males engage in conversations and in exchanges and negotiations, you see those things happening. Whereas females are less bothered with those things. They are more bothered about, is this valuable? How is this going to add value? And I think sometimes females look at the entrepreneurship or the business world even, and they think, oh, but then I'm going to have to be like the guys. I'm going to have to be, tough and like prove myself and, fight for my position, where I don't think that's necessary at all. I think women just resting in their power and resting in their abilities and skills and stepping into that role and going, you know what, I'm not going to do it with those rules in mind. I'm going to do it with what I think is the best way to build this company. I've seen females make massive progress, and in some areas actually moving significantly faster than their male counterparts, simply because the focus isn't on them actually achieving something. The focus is on them actually adding value to something. So the big advice I can give any female founder is, don't try to do it like men do it. And some men do it with an ego focus and they are successful. Some men do it with completely different focuses and they're successful. But don't try and do it with how men are doing it. Just do it in your natural way, and make peace with the fact that unfortunately we still live in a society that's with structures and systems that's rich of patriarchy. But try to not get upset with those things and try not to get distracted and focus on your mission of building something that's meaningful. And just water off a duck's back along the way with some people that don't believe in you and some people that think that the way you're doing things is not the acceptable way. Because I'm telling you, there's no acceptable or right way in doing this. We spoke about the playbook earlier. There's no exact steps that you have to take to do this. It's really about finding a customer, solving the problem, and doing it in a way that works for you.
Brilliant. There's so much encouragement for women in tech today. Thank you. We appreciate the comments, Renier and Aldred. I just want to turn to the Q&A again. There's a comment and question from George Bennett. I'm going to just summarize. George, you were saying that you're speaking about the investment space. So at the moment in South Africa, there's very little investment into developing the skills and incubating tech ideas. And you say only a few corporates have joined. So your question really is how do we change these barriers to improve progression in the sector? So with regards to access to funding from investors, any thoughts? Perhaps Aldred, you have quite a lot of experience now in terms of what investor ready. What makes a company investor ready, and in one regard, and then also how do we invite more investment into tech startups?
So I think there's a massive problem in investments within startups. I think it's something that we need to address. I don't think that it's government's problem. I think that it is the responsibility of the public and the private sector. I think government definitely needs to assist a lot more. But I think that there's a culture that we need to kind of establish. I think that there's almost no culture around an investment for startups in South Africa. I think that I'm really, really lucky to have found investment for GovChat. I would also say that investors do not look at technology, but they invest in people. So it's not about whether you can code or whether you've got the best idea or the greatest idea. They're looking for people that can take it from a concept to something tangible. And that's what I would kind of focus on. They want to be able to see that you don't give up, that you are not going to take no for a answer. Failure is not an option. Just a well-rounded leader, a well-rounded business person. That is what secures, or at least invites an investor. So it's a very, very difficult question. And if it was a lot easier, I think anyone could have gone to like a bank or financial institution, but it's not that easy. It's possibly the most difficult thing out there. And I think that we are going to need to put a lot more effort into creating this culture of investment or an investment case for South African startups. We have insane talent in this country and in this continent. We have the likes of Elon Musk. We have the likes of Mixit. We have the likes of Amir Krill. We have so many amazing stories in South Africa that's worth investing in. And again, I just think it is a culture that we're going to have to create and nurture as well. And we've got to start. Guys like Vusi would tell you that it's a very, very lonely journey, and we need all the help that we can get. I'm going to leave it there. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I think there is a notion that I can't start until I have capital. I've heard that quite a lot. What did you say to that, Aldred? And then I'd love Renier's thoughts as well in terms of investments and investor readiness. Yeah.
So I can only talk from my use case. I started it with nothing. I started GovChat literally with all that I had. And so I guess, and there are many examples, like guys like Marlon Parker would also tell you that you don't need capital and you don't need money to start an idea or a startup. There are many things that you can do. There's friends. I guess it's about how much do you want this? And it kind of will happen, and in time, so it is a tough thing. It really isn't easy, but you definitely don't need funds. You don't need money to get started. There are small things out there. The internet is full of open source platforms where you can plug and play. You don't have to start with an application. There's WordPress sites. There is web native applications that can do the exact same thing as mobile applications, where you don't have to spend millions of rands to kind of find out whether something is going to work. And so use what is out there. Go to an internet cafe, go to incubators, there's just so many infrastructure players out there that can help. You don't have to go and spend a lot of money to try and find out whether something is going to work. So don't go out there and ask someone for 10 million rand to start your idea. It's not going to happen.
Right. Absolutely. There is value in bootstrapping it, in showing that in being the first investor in your own company. There's something about that. Yeah. Renier, what are some of your thoughts related to this?
Yeah, if I can add to what Eldred said, and a lot of the points were discussed earlier, but if you think about all the major tech startups in the world, and I can use two examples. If we think about Uber or Airbnb, because I think those are two companies that most people part of this conversation today would know about. Uber wasn't something new. Like, taxis existed forever, and it's the same with Airbnb. You might not think that, but people rented out rooms in their houses on a much smaller scale to maybe friends and family and people that they know, or businesses that come visiting town. That's been happening forever. The only thing that changed is these people use tech to enable the scaling of these platforms. Now, in a similar way, when you build a tech startup, you can build, in a lot of cases, you can build the entire solution without involving any complicated tech. You could build Google Forms on a front end. You can, and we refer to it as concierge services. Like, if you think about it, Uber is a concierge service. What happens is you say, bring me a cab, and that cab arrives, and it's tech that does all of that. But a first version of Uber could have been, you requested on a Google form, I want to leave and go to town at 3 p.m. And then I see the request on my side coming up through the form. I phone my taxi driver and tell him, go to this address, pick up the guy, and take him there, and he'll pay you cash. And we can do that entire business solution and see, hey, do people come back? Do they want to do it again? Do they want to try it? And as they do it, we can start automating elements of this with low complex tech. Like, we can automate the form and maybe build a front-end screen. Then we can integrate GPS. Then we can allow credit card payments. So you can iteratively build these things without using a lot of money. And I think that's where a lot of South Africans stop. They think, oh no, you need a 10 million rand before you start. Where sometimes you can start with very simple things. And that's why I think we discussed the coding thing earlier around why is it important to learn to code. Coding is an interesting skill, and there's two parts to it. One is pursuing a career in coding, but coding in terms of a way of thinking is so unique in the sense that it gives you a blank canvas and it gives you a set of tools that you can go about solving or creating something creative, right? You're writing a program from scratch. So you have to conceptualize, how does it look? What is it going to do? And then you use these coding building blocks to start putting it together to ultimately achieve that result. Now, if you take that principle into business and you say you're an entrepreneur, you have tools that you have. You might not have the tool that's 10 million rand in funding, but you do have the tool of Google Sheets that's free to use. You might not have the tool of a family that can support you with entrepreneurship, but you do have a tool of watching videos online that can help you learn these things. So it's the same principle applies, using these tools creatively to create something from a blank canvas. Now, from a funding perspective, I don't think we have as much a funding problem in South Africa as we have a quality startup problem. I think if we deliver better quality startups, and what I mean with that is startups that has the plan and the scope to actually become massive companies. So we're not dreaming nearly big enough in the African context. We think about businesses which are fantastic, by the way, but businesses that employ 5 people and it breaks even after 12 months. Great businesses. We need a lot of those in South Africa. But when it comes to startup and raising funding, we need to get entrepreneurs that have the guts and the boldness to put together plans of billion-rand businesses. If we see those kind of plans and we see startups pursuing those kind of dreams, then the money will follow. So So sometimes people get stuck in the beginning and go, I need funding. Well, the problem why you're not getting funding is, in most cases, a lack of progress, a lack of a big plan. And ultimately, you know, investors look at that and go, you know, there's always risk associated with investment. Any investment, early stage investment, there's a massive amount of risk. And the investors making those investments are fine with the risk. But if the outcome is not going to be big enough, there's no point in taking on that risk, because even if it wasn't risky, the outcome would simply just return the money. Then it's like, well, why would anyone do that? But if an investor looks at your business and says, if I give you $1 million and your plan is big enough to give me $100 million return in 10 years, then I'm happy with that risk, because it's like buying a lotto ticket. I know it's buying a lotto ticket. I know there's a lot of risk, but at least if this is the winning number, then I know I'm going to be getting a lot of money back. And I think that's what entrepreneurs need to focus on: big plans, bold plans, and then, you know, using what's in your hand to work towards executing them.
Right. So again, those attributes of resourcefulness, you know, using what's in your hands. And yeah, I mean, my particular heart is so close to the university space. And Maki, and as we'll probably do a round of closing comments soon, but I just want to pass the ball to you quickly, Maki. How are we going to do this? How are we going to develop these kinds of attributes in our students, you know, so that when they graduate, that they could consider techpreneurship as a viable option for their future? What can we do in the university and higher education space?
I think it's very important that I think the universities and basic education have started having these conversations, but our education systems are still largely traditional. We're still training children for employment. Many children, when you have conversations about what you want to do when you finish, very few of them see themselves as entrepreneur, let alone tech entrepreneurs, right? And there's sometimes still a huge disjuncture between the technical entrepreneurship spaces and the traditional ones. So if you speak to a child and their first experience of entrepreneurship is seeing their aunt selling fruits and veggies at the taxi rank, children don't see that as entrepreneurship, right? But if you say Mark Zuckerberg, they see that as entrepreneurship. And yet their first point of call of an entrepreneurship was not Mark Zuckerberg. They could never actually have a context like Mark Zuckerberg because he dropped out of school, but he had a scenario that was gonna set him up for success. And so the reality is that linking this back into their communities to say this is entrepreneurship, but you now have the skill, you now have the insight into fields that many of your family members could not have the insight for. And this is where we can start in school spaces, moving into university spaces. When you go into higher education, when children come into classrooms, they say, I want to be a business analyst, I want to work for this, I want to work for that. If I can see myself in Accenture, if I can see myself where. So starting to cultivate that entrepreneurial perspective right from the early stages of undergraduate also lies with academics, but then academics are not also trained to be able to help children to conceptualize that perspective. So organizations or centers like the Center for Entrepreneurship at UWC and many other units within higher education play a critical role in bridging that traditional learning, employment route of academia and entrepreneurship and bridges that gap for higher learning institutions. So I feel there's more opportunity to start embracing such units, but really looking how traditional learning happens both within basic education and within higher education too.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think Zainu as well mentioned that most academics are not entrepreneurs. So how do we then cultivate that? So thanks for that contribution, Maki. Great. It's now 16 minutes past 3, and I think if there aren't any other questions, it would be a good time to do another round of closing remarks from our panelists. And perhaps I'd ask a question: if we were to have this conversation 5 years from now, what do you think would be different? What does the future look like? And so yeah, you may also obviously add other remarks that you think, if you were to encourage encourage others to consider techpreneurship as a viable option for their future? You know, what are the things you'd say? I think we'll start with you, Lynette, and then we'll have
Thanks.
Aldred, Maki, and Renier to end off with us.
Okay, closing words I would say is, look, it's not the easiest field to get into, and I think from a female perspective especially, because it is really a non-traditional career path. You know, being an entrepreneur, being a tech entrepreneur for one. But fortunately, things are moving in the right direction. So I would say my words of advice is, don't give something an opportunity. You never know unless you try. You know, just like how you try any other career or field, give this an equal opportunity as well. Because I think what the world has seen, and I think the positive that has come out of COVID, is that literally digital and tech, honestly, it's complementary and it's integrated into pretty much every single field out there. There's a tech element to it. So I think it's important to look at it from that perspective. What I think the conversation is going to be in 5 years' time, I really, really hope it is far more progressive than what we had today. That's my hope. That's my wish. I think that schools, especially, who are embracing the whole non-traditional way of thinking at schools and the non-linear path, I mean, that's going to have a massive advantage going forward into higher education, and even those who don't go into higher education who start working, because it is going to encourage that change in thinking. Because I think that's what we need, is we need a change in mindset, that traditional is not the be all and end all. And I think with COVID and all of that, it's fostering that. So yeah, I think that's what I see. Whether I'd see the numbers of female entrepreneurs double, yeah, I mean, we can always wish for that, but I think it needs to be a collaborative approach. While I do agree with Renier earlier, sorry, I had to come back to that, the points that he made, that yes, we do need to stick to our abilities, and we do need to not do what men are doing, of course. But then also, you know, speaking as a woman in tech who is there with, you know, the only woman in a boardroom full of men, where all the men are speaking way above me, even though I'm on equal, if not higher level than them, it is very intimidating. It is also very soul destroying, because you leave there feeling intimidated. So my advice is, don't be intimidated by this. Don't be afraid to speak up, women. If you know something, make your point. It doesn't mean that you are acting like a man. It just means you are making it clear that you know what you're talking about too. Because quite often, and this is what I find as well, is that as females, we raise our hands and talk, but as guys, you know, they just shout it out. And let them shout it out. Still raise your hand and still make your point, because you know what? I think if more women like us do that, the more we are seen as strong women and not inferior women who are just following what other people say. So yeah, it's not about acting like a man, but it's really about just showing that you know what you're talking about too.
Fantastic. Show up strong.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Aldred.
So 2 pieces of advice. Don't chase money, chase purpose. Make sure that the DNA of what you're trying to do is really, really solid, that it's real. The second thing I would say is, because this is a very lonely journey, marry the right person. There's nothing like having an amazing partner. And my success is 95% is my wife. She's been amazing. She is an amazing pillar of strength. So make sure that you marry the right person. Then in 5 years, I'd like to see we move the conversation from carrying passports and IDs, that we're changing the digital identity of South Africans and Africans. And if we can mix that together with the way that we are paying one another, I think it's going to be a game changer. I think it's possibly what's going to be able to fix this continent. So if we get digital payments right, if we get the digital identity right on the African continent, I think it's going to change the way that we do things in the next 5 years. I'm really excited to be part of that conversation, and that we're not going to be able to need to move with documents and things, that you're going to have this little phone and everything is on here. And that's where I'd like to see us chat and be in the next 5 years. Thank you very much.
Progressive indeed, Aldred. Maki, are you ready for us?
Yes, I am. Piece of the two pieces of advice, this is especially for women who decide to be entrepreneurs within the tech space. Equip yourself and arm yourself with skills. This doesn't have to be through a degreed program, but a short course that you can find online. There is nothing as powerful as having the technical know-how of whatever field that you're going in. There's nothing as frustrating as continuously depending on other people to help you with knowledge. Have the basic insight to be able to talk the language, to be able to have better control of the area that you go in. Secondly, find mentorship, find your tribe. As panelists mentioned, it's such a lonely journey, and finding people who have somewhat of an understanding of what you're going through, who can support you, especially when it's of the few unicorns of women within the tech space. Find them, spend time with those people to be able to help reaffirm what it is that you're doing. 5 years from now on, I think honestly for me in South Africa, basic education holds the key. Higher education doesn't necessarily hold the key, because in a country where you have high unemployment, in a country where you have a high percentage of children who are not in school, who are not in work, most of the learning will happen in basic education. And this has been seen across countries throughout the world where people decide to become entrepreneurs. Much of the skills that they gain, the basic skills that they gain, came from their high school learning. So if you have a much more evolved educational system that allows that creativity, that innovation to be fostered within basic education, then we're setting up our kids for a brighter future.
Thanks for that, Maki. It's roots. It's going back to the roots. And I like that. I like that. Renier, would you close off comments from the panelists today?
Sure, thanks, Lona. So I think what I would love to see is I would love to see just our entrepreneurial culture growing. So recently I read a report that stated they did research on entrepreneurial appetite across the African continent. Now, the continental average of entrepreneurial appetite, which basically is people that have the appetite to become an entrepreneur, is around about 40%, where in South Africa it's only 12%. So we are almost 4 times less eager to start businesses in South Africa than we are the rest of the continent. And there's deep ingrained reasons for that date back many years across different races, different culture. It's just not in our DNA or in our culture to start businesses. I would love to see more people giving it a shot so that we can start building these case studies of people that were successful in business that can start coaching and guiding future generations to build more businesses. Africa, we all know Africa is going to grow tremendously in numbers. We're going to be employing a lot of people in the future, and all these businesses we're going to create will be the vehicle that will employ these people. So that's what I would love to see. What I think is going to happen, which I'm really excited about, I think we can all agree this COVID-19 lockdown situation globally was a bit of a black swan event. And what kind of happened is, you know, the centers of power across every sector, every industry has shifted politically, economically, and it's almost, you know, our president speaks about it often. It's like a time for us to rebuild it from scratch, to rebuild our economy much more inclusive. And I think it is actually an opportunity for all of us to reimagine what the world could look like. Because some of these things have been shaken down to foundation, and we can look like what does the business world look like that's more equal, that has more opportunity for females? What does the business world look like, you know, where the centers of power when it comes to capital is maybe not as powerful as it was in the past? And I believe a lot of those things are now becoming possible in the world. Another thing which I'm seeing, which actually happened pre-COVID, is there's a lot more activity in the funding space in South Africa when it comes to venture capital and early stage startups. Now, 2-3 years ago, if I had to find venture capital companies or even seed or angel investors, I would have a really tough time of finding 10 ones that were really active. At the moment, there are probably about 50. So we can really see the space going. We're seeing really cool deals. We're seeing things happening. So in 5 years' time, the stories of a GovChat, the stories of some of the other startups that are getting funding now, and Sweet Self, the story of Aerobotics, you know, all of these startups receive good funding, they go international, and a lot of them will be success stories. And because of that success stories, a few things will happen. There will be a bigger appetite for entrepreneurship. So I think our 12% will at least double in the next 5 years. There will be more funders keen to invest. We'll get more support from government because they'll see this is actually working, it's generating revenue for the country, it's creating jobs. And we'll see academics coming on board, and just the entire ecosystem. I really believe it's going to explode in the next 5 years. Wonderful opportunities, a great business is being built, and a lot of progress for South Africa as a whole. So very excited, and watch the space.
Renier, you've ended this webinar on a high, and I want to thank you and each of the panelists that join us today. Just a big thank you from all of us at the CEI in speaking about techpreneurship. Is this a viable option for your future? So to the audience, thank you for your questions, thank you for the comments, and do look out for the link to the webinar. And we hope to do more of this in the months to come. And just again, a huge thank you from us. And what a great conversation, rich inputs, and a hopeful message to everybody who's considering techpreneurship as a viable option for their future. Thank you from me, and have a good rest of the afternoon.
Bye-bye.